Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is August 19th, 2024. Welcome to the podcast. I want to talk again about U.S. government policy on elections. What the news agencies won't tell you about the presidential election. I was actually going to hold off on this one. However, over the weekend, I heard some things on the news, and the DNC convention is this week. So I thought, why not? Okay, so what they're not telling us. Now let's start with the Republicans that you won't hear anywhere but here, apparently. The news media and Trump, the spouses, pose against Trump. Now, here is what I want to know. So, typically, candidates have their spouses with them when they're running for president. And yes, they did mention that President Trump's wife wouldn't have a lot of involvement. However, at this point in time, I think that she really needs to be on the trail with him, and the news media is not talking about that in any form or fashion, any any side, because during a typical presidential election, that would be an easy thing for them to talk about and to point, counterpoint, and do those types of things. The next one is the news media and Trump. Now, of course, if President Trump calls into Fox News, seems to be they ask him questions. The difference is that the Democrats will not go on Fox News or any moderate or conservative TV shows. And if you're running for president, don't you think that you should be doing that? And why isn't the media questioning that more? But with Trump, he actually has gone to the medias of the progressives and the Democrats, and he actually gets asked a lot of questions that have absolutely nothing to do with policy. Why? When Harris is on there, it's totally different, and she won't even go. And Biden, when he was running still, he wouldn't go on any conservative shows either. Why isn't the press talking about that? Don't you want to reach the people on the other side? The biggest one, though, is the polls against Trump. So Harris takes over, and then within 3 days, the polls change. Now, let's talk about this one for a second. Pull it back some. Any person that they are talking to would have to have time to change their mind. And you're telling me that within 2 or 3 days of a change, the polls showed Harris making big gains. Also, remember, these are controlled groups, and it's a little. Sometimes I'm not sure who they are asking. It's supposedly registered voters, and you're telling me that with changing who the person is, there's this huge jump in polls for someone else without knowing even what the policies are. So why aren't the news media talking about the fact that these polls are changing much too quickly for them to be valid? And in previous podcasts, I have mentioned the fact that the polling, if you will remember, in 2016, it had Hillary Clinton leading by a sizable amount. And at the time, I told you that I thought that in that point in time, up until now, people are not telling you who they are voting for. I'll say it again. People are not telling you who they are actually going to vote for, because that would be the difference in the polls. And like I told you previously, the media made all kinds of excuses to why their polling wasn't accurate. All right, so we looked at the Republican side of the presidential election and the what the news agencies aren't telling you about. Okay, so let's start with Vice President Harris in the 2020 election. When she was running in 2020, she had just got in the Senate, and also she was the previous Attorney General in California. So when she started running for president, the minorities didn't really embrace her. And at the time, it was because of how tough she was as an attorney general in the state of California. Anytime that subject comes up now, and say like in the election of 2020, it gets killed, it's gone. It's hard to find her record on that now, unless you really dig deep. And the news agencies have not questioned her about that whatsoever, digging deeper to why she made such a drastic change. There was some comments from the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Johnson, that got me thinking. And it won't be talked about. Please go back and listen to what he said. What he was doing was he was drawing soft parallels between the Palestinian people wanting to protest, and this was soft, the civil rights movement and people being oppressed. Now, Mayor Johnson is going to be at the convention. Also, Cori Bush is going to be there too. And the media really has not talked about what these politicians are talking about, and the fact what their rhetoric is. And oh, by the way, did you know that the Palestinians protesting, some of the people that are part of the protests are Black Lives Matter? The news agencies haven't said a word about that. And if I wouldn't have seen it on a random article from one of the news agencies, and again, next day, it was gone. They have aligned themselves with them. Now, I talked about Cori Bush a little bit. Why isn't the media talking about Cori Bush being at the Democratic convention? Do the Democrats want to be aligned with her? And I'm not saying anything bad about her, but we know her views. Is she going to get a picture with Vice President Harris? And will anybody talk about it besides me? So, why are the Palestinians at the Democratic National Convention protesting? And yes, they did protest at the Republican National Convention. Two things. The first one is if they're, and they've said this, they want the funding to stop for Israel. So why would they be at the Democratic National Convention? Congress controls who gets money, which countries get money. Now, remember something, the Democrats, and I told you this last podcast, they have funded Haiti sending the Kenyans over there. And I think, and I'll bring this thing home, I think that the Palestinians are there so that if Harris gets elected, because they know for sure that Trump will never do it, she can direct the State Department to give money to Palestine to help them rebuild. And as I've told you previously, that's what I think their strategy is, meaning the Palestinian protesters. Now, again, news media, we got smart people there. How come they're not putting the pieces together and even talking about what they are actually protesting at the convention? They know that Harris and Biden are on their side. Why? Because they, meaning the president and vice president who are in there currently, are trying to get the ceasefire. So I believe again that it's about money and funding. That's why they're there. To sum this up, the news media has a responsibility to report all angles of the presidential election. And especially this cycle, they haven't done that. I'm a pretty good strategist, and we've got some smart people in these news agencies, and they are not talking about things like this.